afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to continue our work today. This item is an interview for the County Executive's appointee for Director of the Department of Transportation, Mr. Christopher Conklin. If you'd like to come and join us. Let me turn it over to Mr. Klein for any remarks.
Good afternoon, Council President Navarro, members of the Council. I'm Andrew Klein, Chief Administrative Officer. I am pleased to present to you for interview Chris Conklin, the County Executive's nominee for Director of the Department of Transportation. As you all know very well, Chris is a true transportation expert. Before he came to Montgomery County government in 2016, he spent 20 years working on projects across the National Capital Region, including transit strategy, transportation technology, traffic management, complete streets, bicycle improvements, pedestrian safety, environmental analysis, infrastructure finance, and more. And I've seen Chris's expertise in action on issues ranging from BRT, Vision Zero, microtransit, as well as the state's toll road proposal. So we're very lucky to have Chris as part of our team, and I'm very excited to see him promoted. As a last note, I want to publicly thank our current DOT Director, Al Rashdi. Al is retiring next week after 30 years of outstanding service to the people of Montgomery County. And, Chris will bring new ideas and new leadership, and will face new challenges in this role. Al has left him a department that is ready and fully capable of taking all of that on. So with that, I turn it back to you, Madam President.
Thank you so much, Mr. Klein. Well, Mr. Conklin, I have a number of questions that I will ask, and then we'll open for conversation with my colleagues. Okay?
Great.
So the first one is if you can just tell us a little bit more. Of course, we know a lot already of your professional background and how that relates to the specific responsibilities of the Director of the Department of Transportation.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I'll just start by saying it's kind of unusual, but I've been interested in transportation since I was a kid. I remember I always liked to play with the wooden Brio trains and build a new configuration of track. But I always had to do it at somebody else's house because my parents wouldn't buy that for me for some reason. And then as I became a student in school, I wasn't that good a student, believe it or not. And I would get myself distracted drawing networks of roads and interchanges and towns and all kinds of things on a piece of paper while the teacher was trying to teach me something important that didn't really hit my interest that day. So I've been at this for a long time. I actually, when I started college, I became interested in transportation. I kind of knew I wanted to be a civil engineer based on my experience with some other dads in the neighborhood that I liked what they did. I liked the types of things that they were involved in. I liked the way they were able to balance work and life in that profession. And then I became interested in transportation because unlike most engineering disciplines, transportation is directly related to community. Most engineering disciplines are kind of off to the side. You're figuring out problems that people gave you and then coming back with answers. But in this particular field, you really had to understand people and how they related to the systems that were around you. So I immediately focused on that, and I also did a work-study program, a cooperative education program. So I started working professionally at the same time as I started studies. And that really helped me understand the difference between what we were learning in school and the practical application of this. And I worked in all levels of this field, from counting cars at intersections, which I'm not very good at, all the way through strategic transportation planning for transportation agencies and graduate work. I continued working through grad school as I studied technology policy and transportation. And I worked on a lot of really great projects: redevelopment of the South Boston waterfront, redevelopment of other rail yard properties around Boston, economic strategy planning for the biotech industry in Massachusetts, things that I learned a lot. And then I got the good fortune to get involved in a practice area for campus planning for higher education institutions, medical centers. So I got to travel around the whole East Coast. I didn't work on the West Coast, but from St. Louis East, working on medical centers and universities and how they were trying to drive economic development in their region and have a transportation system that would work for the industries they were trying to attract, independent of the actual academic or medical functions that were occurring at those, which were also part of the work. So I got to see a lot of different places, a lot of different ways of doing things, a lot of different styles about how transportation agencies related to their communities, what kinds of things were important or not important in different places. And that helped me get a good sensibility about how to respond to community issues as they come to us here in the DOT. I've also stayed connected with transportation advancement and research. I've been involved in the Transportation Research Board of the National Academies for about 20 years in a couple different committees. One was the Transportation and Land Use Committee that I was involved in for the maximum 12 years I was allowed to be. And since then, I've been involved in the Transportation and Public Lands Committee, which is trying to figure out how to meet the needs to connect populations to parks and other recreational opportunities. They've both been excellent experiences, and I've learned a lot through that. I've also learned through this experience that it's not all about technical understanding. There's a very important component of being able to lead and develop an effective workforce that tackles problems together at all levels. I've managed different sizes of teams, from a practice team of a few hundred professionals. In the DOT, currently I obviously have a relationship with many of our 1,500 or so employees. And I've learned that you can't tell people what to do. You have to make them understand why you're asking them to do something and show them why what they're doing is important through that. My career in the private sector ended as I joined the county, and the culmination of that was me leaving the board of directors of a 1,200-person professional services firm, where I was directly responsible for the governance of that company, but also I was leading the practice management for transportation in the Mid-Atlantic, a service role for campuses, and a business leadership role for the National Capital Region for the firm's practice there. It was a very, very difficult decision for me to do that, but I knew some wonderful people here in Montgomery County. It's actually through that private firm I got to know Montgomery County. I had worked, one of the seminal projects, I'll call it, of my career was redoing the project development and design standards for the state of Massachusetts for their highway department. And at the time, you know, they had a relatively backwards way of doing things, applying very rigid standards and using those standards as a reason to say no to answering communities' needs. After that, I got to work with Montgomery County. I got hired to do the county's road code, and that was a rough introduction to this county, I've got to say. Came into a long-standing fight with entrenched interests, didn't quite understand all the dynamics, but after a couple years of hard work, we got a product that people appreciated. I then worked with the county on their bus rapid transit program, some of the early studies on service planning and integration, the early cost estimates for the transit task force a few years ago, and also on the pedestrian safety initiative. The county executive, Leggett, had started doing road safety audits for the DOT and the traffic division. So I got to know a lot of people here. We relocated from New England to here, and it's been a good experience since then. About 3 years ago, as Andrew mentioned, County Executive Leggett and Director Roshdi asked me to come on board at the DOT. I had a heart-wrenching decision about whether to do that or not, and ultimately decided that it was time for me to have a different experience than I had in corporate life, so joined the DOT. Since then, it's been a very, very good experience here. I've been involved in some important initiatives. I was actually leading the traffic division when the Vision Zero plan was announced, and I know that division is committed fully to achieving the engineering objectives in the Vision Zero plan. I got to participate in the last update of the subdivision staging policy with the Fed committee, which I enjoyed very much, trying to apply some of my early career lessons to development here in the county. We have done, I think, a very good job of improving our collaboration with the planning department so that we are together when plans come before this council, that they understand our views, that we're not bringing disagreements at the last minute on these plans. I think the bike plan was a great example of that, where we worked hand in hand with them, going through their recommendations, develop cost estimates, trying to figure out prioritization within that plan, so that all of those things were in the plan before they came to the council for its consideration. We've also done a lot of work to improve our working relationship with WMATA. I was able to represent the county in the funding work groups a year or so ago that led to the adoption of the dedicated funding arrangements for WMATA. Mr. Klein's predecessor, Mr. Firestein, asked me to take that role on, and I really enjoyed that, and I think we made a lot of progress at COG with the CAOs group that was working on that. And also with the state, have a very excellent relationship with Greg Slater and his team at SHA, and we have seen that agency move substantially towards improving pedestrian safety and moving towards urban design standards and other things that are helpful to our community. So I think both my previous experience and my experience here at Montgomery County have really set me up to lead the type of collaborative engagements that we need to mentor, guide, and encourage our staff to do the things that are best for the county, and to bring the best technical resources to bear so that we can solve what aren't insignificant problems as this department in the county moves forward. So hopefully that's enough. I'll try not to talk too much during this.
So regarding Vision Zero, as you know, it will require significant improvements in engineering, education, and enforcement. The engineering component rests squarely with DOT, in association, of course, with the State Highway Administration. What new engineering initiatives do you believe that DOT and SHA should undertake?
Sure. Before I go into the engineering initiatives, I want to reiterate that this is a multi-pronged approach. The engineering components are some of the costliest strategies available to us and some of the hardest to implement. We've made good progress on them, but without the communications and education components, without the law, policy, and advocacy components, and without the enforcement components, our work on the engineering side will fall short of meeting the goals. That being said, what we've done in the first 2 years of the Vision Zero plan is a lot of work to identify what are the causes of the clusters of crashes we're seeing and what strategies are broadly available to address them. Those were the goals in the 2-year plan, but those are not goals that will result in us having significant reductions in severe and fatal collisions. The most significant thing we need to do going forward is to take that early work and apply it to the programs that we already have in DOT, plus any others that develop. So some of them are the traffic signals program, the pedestrian safety program, the intersection and spot improvements program, neighborhood traffic calming program. Take those programs and make sure all of the projects that we're doing in those programs are focused on addressing the areas where these collisions are occurring and are specifically targeted to address reductions. Many of those programs have multifaceted objectives: ADA compliance, bus shelter improvements, traffic congestion relief, but all of those programs can contribute to us reducing the crashes. So I think that is by far the most significant step we take in the engineering component of this initiative. Secondly, we need to track the crashes that continue to occur, and they will continue to occur, to understand whether they're following the trends and the locations that we've seen in the crashes that are documented in the analysis in the plan. And if there are changes in those trends, we need to make sure that we take the steps to address the investigations we're doing of them and adopt our approaches so that we're meeting the crashes as they occur and not relying just on the historical data. I think there's an important element of this that's retaining a systematic approach to this. We have lots of news of fatal and severe crashes occurring. None of us are happy to hear this news. We all want to go and investigate what happened and why, and that's important. But we can't let that distract from what we know in the data-based analysis and the known strategies to address that and working on those issues. So there's an important element of us staying focused on what the data is telling us to do and not reacting too much to crashes that occur here and there over time. There's an element of this that's planning for safety. Safety has usually been an afterthought in our planning activities, and I think that's been changing with the Vision Zero corridor plan for Veers Mill that was adopted earlier this year, the Forest Glen Montgomery Hills plan that's coming before you from the Planning Department. to make sure that adopting plans that specifically address Vision Zero issues, so that those are cooked into what we want to do, is going to be very important. Also, we need to move from an approach eventually, we haven't got this work done yet, but as we get this work done, from addressing locations where we know we have problems to looking at other locations that have similar characteristics where we haven't seen a problem yet, so that we're taking the programs that we have and applying them in a preventive way and not just a reactionary way. As we look at our broader capital improvement program, we need to take a close look at all of those projects and make sure that they're both intended to and designed to have a safety benefit. If we have a congestion relief project, that doesn't mean we can't find ways to improve safety through that. One of the objectives in the Vision Zero action plan is the road safety audits for planning and design projects. Getting that program up and running so that we're doing that as we go to build projects and make sure that we're not perpetuating problems through applying past standards is going to be an important component. We will make Vision Zero issues a standing agenda item in our meetings with the State Highway Administration. We meet monthly with them to go over CIP coordination and other issues. This needs to be a part of our conversation every month in that meeting, so that we're addressing the things that have come up since we last met, and so that we continue to hold each other accountable and making progress on the things that we said we would do to address these safety issues. For DOT, there's an element of this that we need to take some more risks. We, as an organization, we're all engineers. We don't like to talk that much. And we tend to be protective of our own initiatives. We need to encourage and take risks reaching out to police, to fire and rescue, to public schools, to PIO, and put ourselves out there a little bit more to be with our partners as they're taking efforts to address these issues, to say we're with them and we're not over on our own doing our own thing, but this is a coordinated effort. And that will take work. That sounds trivial, but that will take work with our staff to get ourselves comfortable to be more in the public eye on this. I think there's a big opening with Montgomery County Public Schools. I know that they're interested in this, and we need to do more transportation training with the public schools. I think particularly in the middle schools where kids are starting to have more independence and they are more comfortable going out on their own. Their parents, like me, may not be comfortable with this, but the kids are exploring on their own. They're walking to a restaurant with their friends on their own. To get lessons on safe walking, how to use transit, how to bike, making sure that they know what to do at a crosswalk, making sure that they're paying attention, is an area that I think we really need to focus on. And our communications has been lackluster in the things that we have accomplished in Vision Zero, and making sure that we're communicating to the public what we've done, why we're doing it, and how it benefits them, and how we want them to respond are big things going forward. Vision Zero is pretty important to me. I was a doubter, I'll admit, when this started, because I had been schooled in the Towards Zero Death program that the federal government had put forward for a long time, and I didn't quite understand the change in objective here. But I think over the last 2 years, we've really gained an appreciation for how Vision Zero is a change in mindset to this and not another safety program, and I think I look forward to continuing to advance that so that we really do start to see the numbers of these crashes decline.
Thank you. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned the school system. This morning as I'm driving to work, I'm going westbound on Randolph Road. I'm in the corner of Randolph and Glen Allen, and I see these two beautiful children, probably a 9-year-old and probably a 6-year-old, look like siblings, on the crosswalk, going towards Glen Allen Elementary School, and I'm watching them cross, and then I see how they veered away from the crosswalk because there were no cars and kind of went perpendicular into the sidewalk, and I'm watching Glen Allen because if a car is going to turn right on Randolph, they won't see them. And, it was just one of those moments where I just wanted to leap out of the car, but I'm on the other side. But anyway, I got to call into MCPS because I wasn't sure how come there were no cross guards. It was 8:56 in the morning, but it just really, it was one of those moments, especially as a mom, where it was like, oh my God. Because at that time, in rush hour, people are, trying. Right. They would not have seen them if there was a car going through. So that kind of collaboration is so important to continue to work on in terms of education and figuring out those pieces. Accomplishing the reductions in carbon emissions is also a difficult challenge. What new initiatives do you advocate a DOT and SHA undertake to achieve this objective?
This is a difficult challenge. We have built a community over 75 years that was focused on a suburban development pattern. And what that means is we're not going to be able to change that pattern substantially in a short period of time. We're going to have to figure out how to get our climate goals to work within a land use pattern that we've already established. So there are a few keys to this. One is that we have to, at the pace we can afford to, and the pace that we need to have some urgency about, provide alternatives that are more carbon friendly, climate friendly than driving in your own car. And we have to make those alternatives realistically available so that people can use them. We can't beat on a drum to say take the bus when the bus doesn't meet the needs of the community. We can't tell people to walk and bike when the walking and biking infrastructure isn't available or safe for them to use. We have to make those services and that infrastructure available. That will take time, but we need to do it as quickly as we can. We need to evolve our transit offerings to better meet the transportation needs of our community. In our planning for BRT, we've seen some of the biggest gains are in the off-peak periods. It's not all about commuting. We've had a commuting-focused program, but the off-peak travel is actually more than the peak period commuting, so we need to recognize that. The micro-mobility systems that we have a love-hate relationship, scooters and bikes and all those things, they will play a role in the future. We don't know what role. We don't know how their safety performance is ultimately going to pan out. But we have to make the effort to understand how these systems will work and how they can meet our community's needs. We need to continue to focus on our land use plan and make sure we foster as shorter trips as we can with as many multimodal options or as available for as many of those trips as possible. That will have a big impact on the type of transportation demands on our network. We need to communicate broadly in a way that influences people's commuting choices or travel choices. We had an example just this week. I got an email last night about a person who had interacted with our folks on Car Free Day. He got a packet of giveaways, and in that was a request that you make a pledge to try for a day commuting a different way. He was an up-county resident, lived in Germantown, drove 15 miles a day to Shady Grove to take Metro downtown. He decided he would try riding the bus from the Germantown Transit Center to Shady Grove. He's saving now 7,000 miles a year in personal car travel, and responded to us what a big difference we made by giving him that idea that he should try it differently for a day. And that goes beyond just commuting, like I said, to all types of transportation choices. Part of that is broadening our TDM application, which we're having an ongoing conversation about, but a lot of it is that community-based conversation about, think about the choice you're making, can you do it differently tomorrow than you did it today? Like I said, our land use pattern is not going to change dramatically in the time that we need to respond to this climate requirement, that we reduce our carbon. So electrification of our fleets is going to be really important. We're working on that on the transit side, but frankly, the government emissions are very, very small compared to the county emissions. The real place we need to make progress is on electrification of the private vehicle fleet. There's things we can do as the county DOT through increasing the charging opportunities in public right-of-way in addition to our parking garages. We're working on that now, but we've had a slow start on that. We need to accelerate our efforts on that, and working with the state and perhaps even the county to try to encourage additional incentives or even adequate incentives for private EV adoption. Right now, the state runs out of their incentive money about a week after the fiscal year starts each year, and that really doesn't help people decide to change their choice of vehicle, because there is a significant premium for buying an electric vehicle. The last component of this is we're pretty late to the game to actually affect climate change. We're experiencing the impacts of this already, and we need to take a close look at our infrastructure to make sure it can stand up to the challenges that are being placed on it by an emerging climate reality, with increased intensity of storms, increased heat with stress on our pavements, increased freeze-thaw cycles when it's not as cold in the winter. And I think we have a lot of work to do on the infrastructure side as well to respond to this challenge.
Montgomery County is partly urban, partly suburban, and partly rural. Where should transit improvements take priority, and where should adding roadway capacity take priority?
Yeah, this is an interesting question. These are not alternatives to each other. We need to change or adapt our road network in our urban areas. We need more road capacity in some of our further suburbs. The Ag Reserve may not need more of either of these. I suspect it doesn't, but it needs adequate maintenance. One of the things I've been thinking about is when we look at the need for additional road capacity in our urban areas or even our inner suburban areas, it looks very different than it does in other areas. When you look at the Western Workaround Project, for example, in White Flint, we are creating new capacity there by creating a grid of streets and parallel travel routes. That's a very different type of investment than when we're talking about an observation drive road connection between Clarksburg and Germantown. They're both needed, they're both in different places, they both have entirely different contexts. I think there's a parallel when we look at transit. When we are looking at transit in our key activity centers, we have a lot of transit service. What we need to really focus on is the reliability and attractiveness of that service. When we're looking at our suburban areas, we probably don't have enough transit service. The frequencies aren't sufficient, the coverage isn't sufficient. We need to look at increasing the quantity while we're also focusing on the quality. As we get into the more rural communities, think Poolesville and Damascus, we need to have the connections between those communities to the more established activity centers, but we may not need to be trying to serve every location within that rural district with transit. That would be somewhat inefficient. We actually looked at that as part of the WMATA bus transformation project, and that was one of the goals. Should we have a uniform availability of transit across the entire WMATA service area? And I don't think that's a realistic proposition, both financially or in terms of use of resources. So, like I said, these are not alternative systems. The transit system doesn't work without a highly well-functioning road system. The transit is essential for people who can't take advantage of driving their own vehicle on our road system for one reason or another, and we need to make sure that we're taking the right approach in each area of our county.
Economic development is a top priority of the council. What projects that are not already programmed by the county or state will produce the most bang for the buck in promoting economic development, in your opinion?
I think in terms of economic development, we have a lot of good plans, but as your question alludes to, we may not have committed the resources to some of the important things here. I think probably the highest return on investment could be investment in the White Flint East and West road networks that are part of the capital improvement program, but the revenues haven't been realized to fund those. Those really create the environment in which the development could flourish there. The improvement to Maryland 355 that might be realized through the BRT program, or it's also a component of those CIPs, I think could realize fruit relatively quickly in terms of economic development. Something that hasn't really been articulated in our capital plans is the need for park and ride. We are very, very strapped for park and ride capacity pretty much throughout the county. Each of those park and ride opportunities brings with it a joint development opportunity. For example, if you look at the Germantown MARC station, that parking is 100% utilized every day. There's a desire to have transit-oriented development there. We need to figure out how to solve those two problems at the same time, and that's not a unique example. We see the same thing in Burtonsville and the Burtonsville Park and Ride. In a community that would like to see the economic development, we're going to have a lot of stress on that park and ride facility once the BRT is operational. So figuring out how to make those investments that can leverage the economic development and the park and ride capacity, I think is a really good strategy that we need to start working on. The BRT projects are obviously a big component of economic development. They are highly visible investments. They change the dynamic for the locations in which they go and the types of services that are available. And there are a lot of these. I think most likely the 355 project has the highest economic return given the opportunities in that corridor, but I wouldn't cut short New Hampshire Avenue serving the Hillendale, FDA, and East Campus components that's in our planning program. Finding a way to work with the state to get funding recommitted to the Corridor Cities Transitway is essential for the life sciences area. If it's not the current incarnation of that project, then another way to meet the transit needs of that area. And then tying other parts of the county to this through projects like the Randolph Road BRT that has not yet entered our planning program, but is a great opportunity to connect the east and west sides of the county through Wheaton, I think is a critical component to tying all of these economic nodes together. There are some other road project opportunities that I think can leverage other investments that are being made. We, in the Chapter 30 process, which is the way projects are making their way into the state consolidated transportation program now, we had proposed the Clopper 117 improvements that the state did planning work on a few years ago as our highest priority for that. It scored well, but not enough to get funding in the draft CTP. I think as the Watkins Mill interchange opens, that's a project that would really help unlock the economic development opportunities in that part of Gaithersburg. A similar project is the I-270 interchange at Little Seneca Parkway. That is directly adjacent to the ComSat facility. If the state advances their toll lane program for I-270 North, that's a key way to make a strong connection between that economic development opportunity and the transportation network. And then right here in Rockville, we know of some major facility needs at the metro station and some of the deficiencies in how that works today. And I think there's a huge opportunity as major maintenance activities occur at these metro stations to rethink how they function and whether those can unlock more economic potential at those locations.
Thank you. Racial equity is another top priority of the council. How would you measure the achievement of racial equity for a transportation project or program? And what measures will you take to advance racial equity in the transportation CIP and operating budget?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question, and I'm fortunate enough to have been invited by Mr. Klein to participate in the Washington cohort for the Greater Awareness of Racial Equity program that you've probably seen we're participating in. And even in the first couple days of that program, it's been eye-opening to me, somebody who may not have been that cognizant of these issues growing up, the level of institutionalized decision-making to disadvantage particularly African American and Hispanic communities in this country. I may have been aware of that at a superficial level, but not of the level of detail in the way those decisions were actually made. But transportation, from my own knowledge, has had a very checkered past in terms of racial equity. Many of the highway programs developed in the 60s and 70s may not have been intended to reinforce racial divisions, but were certainly implemented in a way to reinforce these divisions and to impact low-income African American and recent immigrant and other minority communities while systematically denying them of the services that they needed in terms of transportation. There are examples of moving subway lines out of neighborhoods that needed that service with sort of vague promises about how that service would be returned. The construction of interstate corridors sort of at the dividing lines between different racial and ethnic groups. There's a long history of this. A lot of work had been done in the 90s and 2000s through the environmental justice requirements in NEPA to make sure that those concepts don't perpetuate themselves in new projects, but that's done little to address those past decisions that created and exacerbated problems that already existed. So what I think, if we think about our capital improvement program, we need to take a look at those projects to understand how much of those past decisions is influencing the way that we've put these projects together going forward. Are those projects actively addressing the disparities in access that exist in our systems? Are we providing services to connect communities that haven't been connected before? But most importantly, is our capital improvement program and the individual projects making our entire community better off while achieving those objectives of narrowing the gaps between access and services in Black, Latina, and other communities and the county as a whole. In our operating programs, it's a little bit different lens. We often have programs that have policies and procedures. Those policies and procedures were established for certain reasons. Councilmember Glass isn't here, but he had brought to our attention some of the issues with the Kids Ride Free program and us requiring extensive documentation to prove eligibility. That's not the intention. The intention is not to disadvantage people who, for a reason of their ethnic background or their immigration status, may not have that documentation. The intention was to make sure that we're making the service available to county residents because it's using county funds. We're able to address some of those concerns through the schools being able to provide that assurance that the student is eligible. There are other programs like that. As we look at those programs, we need to take a look to see whether those policies and procedures that were put in place for legitimate reasons but may have barriers because of ethnic, racial, or other factors are hindering people's ability to participate in those. And that's something we have actually had conversation based on this training about in the department, of starting to make ourselves ask those questions as we're revisiting these programs or looking at changing these programs. And I think that will help make a difference in making sure that our future programs and our infrastructure and services are more equitably distributed and help address some of those gaps that we see in achievement and access.
I really appreciate you giving that example, because I think this is exactly what, the legislation intends to achieve, is for us decision makers to kind of take the second and third, level of questioning in terms of how we're designing the programs, or how are we thinking fully about who we're serving. And it's great, because I think that the more that we practice this, the better off we'll be.
Right.
Are there any conflicts of interest we should be aware of?
Well, there was a potential conflict of interest. You may know that my wife is a county employee in the Department of Transportation. When my nomination for this position was being considered, we engaged with the county attorney to discuss how that needed to be managed. Joanna will be transferred to the Department of General Services for all personnel-related matters if I'm lucky enough to receive your support for this position, and that would resolve that potential conflict of interest. And other than that, I have no personal or business relationships that I'm aware of creating any conflict of interest, and I don't even think there are any that I'm not aware of creating a conflict of interest.
Thank you so much. All right, Councilmember Jawando.
Thank you, Council President, and Mr. Conklin. Yeah, I'm over here.
Sorry about
on
that.
The abandoned wing today. Thank you for just your expertise. It's really refreshing to have someone with your depth of knowledge and experience and track record and level of understanding of the complexity and interconnectivity of the issues before us. So, I won't bury the lead. You have my vote. This is just to influence what you do when you get into the job. And we had a great conversation. I just have a couple of questions. Vision Zero. So obviously that's critically important. I really appreciated how you discussed it. One of the goals that we had in Vision Zero was to have a 35% reduction in deaths by this November. And looking at the data, it looks like we are doing pretty well as far as cyclist and motor vehicle fatalities, but pedestrians, we're on track to have a slight increase in my reading of the data. We have usually about 9.8 a year. We already have had 9 this year. Unfortunately, we'll probably have a few more this year. Could you talk about why? And then and then the other part of this is, in the historical average of total fatalities, we're about where we've been. And so can you talk about why you think that's the case and what you want to do to, as I'm sure you want to lower those numbers?
I can, and the national trends are actually far worse than our local trends. Not that that gives us any solace or comfort. The reasons for that are more vehicular travel. We have seen an uptick again in VMT, and the more cars that are on the road, the more exposure there is to pedestrians. We have also seen an increase in walking in our activity centers. So again, we have more people on the road, therefore more exposure to collisions. Speed is a significant contributor. Some of the actions that were taken this summer to reduce the speed limits on our major corridors are an effort to address the severity of these collisions. Lowering the speed limit alone will not result in the reductions that we need to. We need to make physical changes to those facilities or operational changes to reduce the exposure of pedestrians. You are right. We are in the most dangerous part of the year, and I anticipate there will be more fatalities before the year is out, and we will not hit the target on those numbers. Some of the things that we are working on to address this are developing a standard approach to crosswalk protection. Right now, it's an ad hoc decision at each crosswalk what the right measures are, and we are trying to go through all the different types of situations and have a template recommendation for those so that we have more uniformity both for the drivers and for the pedestrians of how to operate the systems, how to respond to the systems. Distracted driving is a continued struggle. Our devices in our pockets are incredibly compelling, and it's very difficult for us to get people to turn that off and to pay attention to what we're doing. I'll admit I'm guilty of that from time to time. I struggle to keep that thing put away while you're in the car.
Yeah.
And we need to do everything we can to encourage our drivers to wait until it's safe to check those things. It's not important that you respond at every instant. And frankly, the in-car systems I don't think are that big of a help. I think they can be just as distracting. Unfortunately, there is not a 3-month action plan to address these issues. These issues will take time to resolve and to really make progress on that. So we really need to stay focused, as I mentioned, on addressing these in a systematic way over the long term.
I appreciate that, and I want to add just distracted walking to your list too. I mean, I've been hearing more and more cases of, and guilty of it myself, not looking, crossing the street, and obviously the vehicle has the higher burden, of course.
Right.
Crosswalk protection. I did the walking tour of Wheaton with the planning department. I measured personally the amount of time, and I have a pretty good gait of getting across intersections was not consistent with the 3 feet or whatever our standard is. And I told 3 feet per second, 3.5 feet per second.
Yep.
We need to check as many of those in our urban areas as we are. Maybe you already are. I mentioned this to Al when he was on the tour as well. And it clearly, if you were a child, a senior, someone with a disability, you weren't going to make it, because I was starting right when it turned, and I was barely getting there, walking pretty pretty strongly to the other side. So I just would encourage, particularly in our urban centers where we're going to have in these areas that are hot spots, that we check those intersections. And
Yeah.
I just wanted to, maybe you're already doing it.
The reality of those is that it needs to be a longer time than 3.5 feet per second.
I agree with that too. Yeah.
And that's the issue. We had finished retiming to 3.5 feet per second, and we are now revisiting areas that need even more generous timing.
And I know my colleagues, I have one other question because I know my colleagues have a lot of questions. You talked about, and I really appreciated the way you framed systemic and long-term infrastructure inequities that have led us to where we are, and also the operational ones. As we often in the legal field, we talk about, discrimination de facto and de jure discrimination, intended discrimination, but unintended discrimination. And we have a lot of both in our history. And you mentioned, for example, the Kids Ride Free, and I'm glad you're addressing that. One of the other areas is you mentioned this too, how long it takes to get transit and the consistency of that in certain areas.
Yes.
Many of us did the transit challenge, and I joked with my Councilmember Friedson and I, and he was trying to find more difficult ways to get on transit, and because it was very easy for him to get here quickly, and even though I was actually a shorter distance in mileage, it was taking me a lot longer in multiple transfers from the eastern part of the county. And I think, and we talked about this in our meeting, we need to support you in doing a comprehensive review of the usage of the ride-on system, in particular, how long wait times are they at the right spots? Are they at community hubs like libraries, which we've discussed? Right. And I just would like you to speak to that, and also I'm kind of lobbying my colleagues because I think we need to do that. Okay, well, that's great. I mean, we have a transit system that has developed over decades responding to growth of the community. And while it serves many purposes well, it may not serve the needs of today and 5 years from now as well as we would like. We are working on programs like the Flex program to try different models to serve the community, but at the same time, we've got a lot of people who rely on the fixed route services, and we can't address those in a one-off, adjust this, adjust that way, and really improve the system. So we had a conversation, and I think it's an important conversation, and I know it's part of the work program for OLL to take a look at this as well, about are we making the types of adjustments to the transit network that we need to make so that it meets the community's needs.
I think there's a lot of room for improvement in that, and I think we need to undertake that review. The other element of that is, are we effectively communicating how this system works? And I think that's a big challenge. As somebody who uses our Ride-On system about 2 or 3 times a month, I struggle as a professional in this to know which bus to take where that takes me to the route near my house. And I think we need to do a lot of work to better communicate how the system works and when that system isn't working the way it's supposed to, so that we're not leaving people stranded as they're looking for the bus. And connecting to the activity centers that have developed long after the Ride-On routes have been in place, new libraries, new rec centers, new schools, et cetera, is something that needs a close look as well.
Thank you. And amen to BRT on planning on New Hampshire Avenue and on Randolph Road. I think with FDA adding 11,000 employees, hopefully some of which live in that area, it's going to be very needed. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
No need to lobby us for that, because we've been trying to lobby for this for a long time, but I really appreciate you bringing this up. It was reminded me of the earlier conversation with the planning board and the Burtonsville placemaking activity, because often it's that chicken and the egg where we will request, for you guys to take a look at what's happening in the East County vis-a-vis ridership, and then it's like, well, not a lot of people are riding, but not a lot of people are riding because there isn't the frequency and there isn't the capacity, and then you keep getting into that whole thing. So I'm glad to, that we can really, and I do applaud the flex, approaches and things of that nature, but you're right, we need to do so much more to get into that. Councilmember Friedson.
Thank you, Council President, and I just wanted to build off of some of the comments that she was just making and that Councilmember Jawando was making. And I am reminded every month of how expensive it is to live on transit. I mean, frankly, that is one of the challenges that we face when we talk about affordability. I've made a choice, and it's extremely expensive. And so that's one of the challenges, that we not only need to make housing more affordable, but we need to provide access to existing housing that's there. I appreciate all the work that you've already done and a lot of the comments that you've made thus far. Just wanted to build on some of those. I really appreciated the comments you made on equity and some of the unintended consequences. It reminded me of what we frequently say in politics, that if you don't have a seat at the table, you end up on the menu. And I think what you were speaking about was for a long period of time, certain people were not at the table of the decision-making process, and so they ended up on the menu. And so where there had to be a decision of where a highway went, where a road went, where we chose to place transit, what was the first bus route to eliminate in tough budget times, the people who were at the table were spoken for, and the people who weren't in the room weren't. And so I appreciate all of your interest and effort on that, and really building off the Council President, this Council's efforts, and the County Executive's efforts and commitment to changing that. We're talking about access to transportation, and that very much relates, frankly, to who can make it to a meeting and who can't. So it is, to your points and to Councilmember Jawando's point, all interrelated, and all of these issues work together. I appreciate the opportunity that we had to speak together, really talking specifically about Vision Zero, which Councilmember Jawando also mentioned, and I know has been a big focus of ours, the previous council and this current council. And I really appreciate what you said about making sure that safety is at the forefront of our policy making, particularly with transportation, and not as an afterthought of those decisions, as it would be nice if, but we must, when it comes to bike safety, pedestrian safety, we have, to the points that were raised before with the data, the data has names. And, unfortunately in District 1, we've seen those tragic consequences too often, and that's just one part of the county, but 2 deaths within a few weeks of one another, 31-year-old Jennifer Tomorrow, 17-year-old Jake Castle. One is too many, and we have one a month, as you know, in terms of deaths, and 3 collisions every 2 days. The fact that a collision on one of our roads involving a pedestrian or a bicyclist is more common than a sunset is a tragic situation that we've got to solve, and I know you're committed to solving it. Many of our pedestrian and bike safety conversations really come down to the manual for uniform traffic control devices, and the challenge that we have with the state of not just our state roads, but trying to have an engineering basis for the county. I have said before, particularly in Bethesda, when we have lobbied hard for certain traffic calming measures and certain engineering devices, and the response is that they tested it and not enough, there weren't enough pedestrians that crossed at a really dangerous intersection. I've tried to make the case that that's a standard we've never used in other areas, and we don't make a determination of where to put a bridge based on how many people try to swim across a large body of water. We put a bridge where it makes sense, where it's efficient for people to cross, and that's what we should do for pedestrian safety as well. How do we work with you? How does the Department of Transportation work together? I think you being in this role helps us because of the relationship, as you mentioned before, with SHA, Greg Slater, and some of our state partners. I'm looking forward to that, but can you elaborate a little bit more on how we build upon some of the conversations that Greg Slater and others have talked about having the state create a new standard that would allow us to have more of an urban road code, and how we can make sure that we can address these issues and fulfill our Vision Zero goals with the participation and the help of the state?
Sure. One of the things that it took me some time to learn, but I eventually learned, is that engineers rely on guidelines and standards much more than you expect they would, given the amount of education they have. So pointing out that standards and guidelines are not a replacement for thought and analysis is an important thing to do, but to do it in a way that supports them in their practice, making a decision that they're comfortable with making. We are not able to force any particular action by outside agencies through our encouragement, but to show the reasons why these are the right decisions to make and how it is supported by the guidelines and standards that they rely on is the way to do that, so that when they make the decision, they understand it and they're comfortable with the decision they've made. And in my own experience, I learned that because I wrote a guideline, and then I was shocked when the agency used the guideline that I had written to tell me I couldn't do a project I was telling them was a smart project to do. They said, well, it says in our standards we can't do that. I said, well, that's not what it meant. But that's a conversation that is what you have to have some experience with to understand that that's the way people are going to respond. We are, I don't know if the council is aware, but we are working with the planning department now to redo our own design standards, and I know the state is eagerly awaiting to see what we end up releasing to guide their implementation of urban standards. And Greg Slater has told me on many occasions he looks to us to show him the right things to use for SHA in the urban standards, because the vast majority of their system is not urban and not suburban. We're an outlier for them, as is some parts of Prince George's County. They don't run the streets in Baltimore. They don't have a lot of experience with urban roads, and this is where they do.
The idea that US 50 and Wisconsin Avenue and Georgia Avenue and Old Georgetown Road would be treated the same is insane, and so we got to get out of that.
So continuing to work with them on an ongoing basis and making them comfortable with a different basis for those decisions and supporting them when they make those decisions is the most important thing we can do.
I appreciate that, and I think your comments earlier about the speed limits going down not being enough. I think we have to get target speed down, where the speed that people actually drive, not just the speed limits. I mean, this isn't about catching people who go too fast. This is about slowing cars down to keep people safe. And so, look forward to working together to create new standards. Where even in our own policies, we're not looking at a functioning intersection versus a failing intersection exclusively based on how many cars get through the intersection, as opposed to how safely and efficiently can all users, bicyclists, pedestrians, and cars make it through. Policies based on people, not just based on cars or on one versus the other. On 355 BRT, I'm glad you raised it. I see it as an absolutely critical area for our economic potential in the county. I don't think we achieve what we need to economically, and I don't think that we address our traffic and transportation issues without 355 BRT actually moving forward. We have significant ridership. We do have some service currently. We absolutely need more. I think the 101 Express has been a model that has shown that this will work. Dedicated lanes will make it work a lot better. And so I think that, the proof of concept is there. We just have to actually make it happen. It's a well-established and successful route that I use frequently going up and down 355. And I think in order to achieve some of the county executives' interest in the Pike District, White Flint, North Bethesda area for all of the innovation district and the economic potential that he talks about, I don't think that happens without 355 BRT being the skeleton that binds that community together and creates the urban environment that we need. We certainly have to figure out how to pay for the system, how to phase it, and we need it sooner than later. So can you talk a little bit about how quickly we can move forward with that and what the plausibility is to get it going sooner rather than later so we can actually deliver on the promises that we've made to the community?
Yes, we're working on this in 3 different ways at the moment. We had an industry forum last week for the request for information that if you're not aware, when the council approved the funding for advancing engineering of 355, we described how we were considering different models for that project delivery and asking the design, construction, and finance industry to tell us are there ways we could do it better than our traditional approach. We had 60 participants in that last week representing design professionals, infrastructure finance firms, and all kinds of other folks. We were really, really excited with the turnout. They went on the tour of the 22-mile corridor with us, and their responses to us on guidance on how to best execute that project are due in early December. We are not waiting for those responses to continue work on this corridor. Based on the funding provided by council, we have started working on addressing some of the critical issues that emerged from the planning study, avoidance of property takings, avoidance of noise impacts, opportunities for lane repurposing in different parts of the corridor, utility investigations to try to resolve some of the critical uncertainties and cost uncertainties with the project. So all of that work is underway. And then we are also working on a finance study to identify what are the appropriate models and the most suitable models that we might consider to generate revenue necessary to support an investment of this scale. A lot of folks think P3 delivers you money for you to implement a project. Well, that's not really true. You have to have the underlying funding capacity to build the project. The P3 may help you get that money at a different time or a different cost, but it doesn't relieve the county of the need to have the money to build these projects. So those are the 3 major.
I think that might be
work areas
applicable to other scenarios as well.
Yeah, those are the 3 major things that we're working on to move that project forward. And we have not, as you know, yet identified preferred phasing or implementation segments for that project. And there are different arguments and different components of it are worthy for different reasons.
Yeah, I appreciate it, and I think, we talked earlier about a light version of a different transportation project this morning. My concern here is that we potentially have paralysis by analysis. I think that it is, I of all people believe in focusing on cost and making sure that we, have a deliberative and thoughtful process. But as you know, I've been an advocate for let's pick a direction, let's go with that direction, and let's move forward. I just want to make sure that we get from engineering to implementation as quickly as possible, because the longer we wait, the more expensive it gets. And we all agree that this is a priority. We all are talking about doing this, so at a certain point, we just have to do it. And so I appreciate your interest in that and your willingness to move forward, and I'm hopeful that we can make this happen sooner rather than later and make sure that it is not a delayed or a watered down version of what the community expects all along 355 as a critical area for our transportation network and for our economic potential. I'll just close by saying I appreciate the conversation we had privately. You hinted at it quickly today, but about technology. It's not, it's a tree that falls in a forest with nobody there to hear it if we have a really terrific bus route that nobody knows about or that people can't navigate easily, or they don't know where their bus is. I think our app and our overall technology is not adequate to the level of investment that we have and the type of ridership that we have and the type of expectations that our residents have. And so I am hopeful that that's a project that you can take on, because if we're going to be funding Ride On the way that we fund it, if we're going to be creating these new programs like we are in transportation, which I think are terrific. We have to make sure that residents can actually find them, they can use them, they know where their bus is. For a resident to have to call 311 to find out why their bus didn't show up, it doesn't work. And so we've got to have a system that is modern, that is integrated, and that's user-friendly, and that people of all ages, of all backgrounds, and of the diverse type of community that we have that can all access a program in a way that works. So that if they are, to Councilmember Jawando's point, have their nose in their phone, I hope that it's to look up when the bus is coming and to make sure that they can make the connection that they need to get from where they are to where they're going.
Couldn't agree more. And we're in the midst of a major technology upgrade, but right now the communication that's going through those channels needs to be improved.
Absolutely. Well, it couldn't be more needed, and I appreciate the fact that you're on it, and really look forward to continuing to work together with you on these important issues. I don't think that there are many things that we do besides education that are more important than transportation in terms of building the type of community that we have come to expect and that we hope to build. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rice.
Well, thank you very much. And when you start going towards the end, it's good because people have already said some of the things. And so certainly when it came to the Ride On app, I had written down 1.9 out of 5 stars. That's what your evaluation is right now. If you read some of the comments, it's exactly what Councilmember Friedson's been talking about. We've got to do better in terms of making sure there's a disconnect between GPS, all the things that you know about. So I'm not going to belabor that point, but
It
please.
frustrates me when I use it too.
There you
And
go.
yes.
So you know all too well, and you know how important it is to many in our community.
Yes.
I will say this, and this was my lead-in to my second part, which is your racial equity training. And so I want to go back in history a bit to make sure that folks understand that Montgomery County is deeply rooted in racism when it comes to transportation. In 1984, when the metro station came to White Flint, well, actually, it didn't come to White Flint, it came to Nicholson Lane. The reason why it came to Nicholson Lane is because people were concerned about those kids, inner city youth, coming and riding the metro and coming to White Flint and shoplifting and creating all of the challenges. We're deeply rooted in transportation racism here in Montgomery County. It really is one of the things where when it comes to bus service, when it comes to all of the things that we just never had in a lot of the more affordable areas of the county, that's the way it was set up. And it's not your fault, but it certainly is something where we have to understand and embrace that that's how this was formulated and try and fix it as best we can. And we're unfortunately experiencing some of those same things still to this day. When it comes to a lot of the areas, the people who have the longest commutes to get to the workplace are those that are in Germantown, in Montgomery Village, in parts of the East County. And so whether it's more rapid service, it's not that they don't have bus routes that go there, but it's the times of those service that matter so much. And just as we said, that ties into the app that we were talking about. A gentleman said he saw the bus and said that it was on the app coming in 5 minutes. He knew that he needed to be to work, and then it updated after that 5 minutes passed and said that it's 25 minutes. Well, now that man is late for work. And so for a person who's doing shift work versus a person who comes into an office, who begrudgingly my staff knows can come in whenever when they want to, makes a big difference. And so a lot of us who are working in professional careers have that flexibility. The gentleman that you mentioned in Germantown, I'm sure, has that flexibility of showing up whenever they can. They may have a nanny at home or somebody who takes care of kids. You getting your children to the place on time where they need to be to drop them off for service, all of those kinds of things. And I know you know this, Chris, because you work with my office, and I appreciate it. I'm just highlighting it because I want to make sure that that becomes our focus. It really needs to be. And so even in places where we have service, we've said, well, we have service, but it's not the level of service that we need to really make a difference in people's lives and make them want to utilize our service and also make our service work for them. Because at the end of the day, and I know I'm preaching a little bit, but at the end of the day, they're taxpayers. And they're paying us to make sure that we provide them with quality service. And we need to make sure that we're responding in kind. If you wanted to say something about that, and I have a couple other things very quickly.
No, I completely agree with what you said, so I don't have any other commentary.
Excellent. All right. I want to talk about two other things very quickly, which is safe routes to school. Thank you very much. That was a great program that was there with Safe Routes to School this weekend that a number of us attended. And it's really something where we've got to do a better job. It's one of the things where we all have anecdotes. I saw 2 students crossing across Clopper Road the other day, and I swear to God, they almost both got hit by a car that was trying to go. It was the school bus was in the right-hand lane, and the school bus had already stopped. I know, because I know what this bus route does, back down on Clopper near Great Seneca, right before you get to Great Seneca. And so the car had decided, okay, I'm going to speed through. Once I get at the intersection of Clopper, I'm going to speed up, going up the hill, right? Right by where our transit stop is on the left-hand side. I'm going to speed up the hill and get in front of this bus so that I don't have to wait for them as they extend the stop arm. And the kids decided once I had passed, it looked clear, but it wasn't clear because these cars are coming at a very high rate of speed, including this car who wants to pass the bus up the hill, and they couldn't see them, and the kids couldn't see the car and the bus that were coming. And I held my breath as this girl, one of them stopped in the protected median, so kudos to us for having the protected median. The other one sprinted like her life depended on it because it did, and she made it across. But I bet you maybe and hopefully she won't do it again because her friend was yelling at her as I'm looking in my rearview mirror at all this stuff going on. And I'm just thinking to myself, wow, that was narrowly averted. These kinds of things happen in our county all the time. And oh, by the way, it happened just recently over at Dairy Maid and Great Seneca to where a student got hit last week. So when we talk about Safe Routes to School, we've got to do a better job of making sure and working with our school system, and I'm on them like white on rice, to make sure that they do their part when it comes to educating our kids as well. But we need your help. We need a more robust campaign when it comes to our drivers being aware and knowing that during certain hours, be more vigilant, right? Even though some students may be in the wrong, it's not worth killing a kid over because you were right and they were wrong. That's not what a person wants. So I just really encourage us to figure out different ways. Maybe we've seen in other areas to where they've done some innovative approaches when it comes to marketing. I know, trust me, I've seen our marketing campaign that we've done, but it's not working. It's not getting us what we need.
Yep. And we do have new leadership in the Safe Routes to School program. DeJuan Morris joined us a couple months ago from Baltimore and has been doing a very good job. But again, no argument with the points you've made. Redoubling of those efforts is definitely needed.
Excellent. And last but not least, when it came to economic development, certainly when it comes to our Germantown MARC station, one of our heavily used MARC stations in the state, it certainly is one, and just across my desk today, another proposal for building a parking garage. I would just ask for your partnership in working with planning to really be able to move us forward. This is not just about making sure that we can do what we need to in terms of meeting the needs of people who want to use mass transit, where that is their only option, but also when it comes to really being able to spur some additional economic development in a place where we have the largest pocket of our residents, over 100,000 people in the Germantown area. And so from that perspective, would really appreciate your support as well as your innovative thinking and how we work together with MARC Rail as well as the property owners and planning to make something like this happen.
Now, I don't know the details of that proposal, but clearly making the capacity available for people to use the services that are already paid for, that are completely consistent with our goals, are the types of things we need to be doing.
Excellent. We look forward to working with you on that. And thank you very much. And let me just close by saying again, thank you for all that you continue to do. Both Director Roshdi and yourself have been great partners with my office, always answering every single email or text message that I send about trying to get things done in our community and being incredibly responsive to the community. So I really appreciate that and look forward to giving you my positive vote. So
Well,
thank you.
That's why we're here, so I'm glad we're delivering on that.
Councilmember Albornoz.
Thank you, Madam President. I'll try to be brief, but obviously most of the bases have already been covered. I did want to highlight a couple of areas. One is I know our office has seen a larger and larger number of residents interested in speed bumps. I think what we're starting to see through local neighborhoods is because of Waze and because of Google Maps, people to avoid 3, 4, 5 minutes whether it be for construction reasons or whether it be for an accident or congestion on 495, are now diverting much more than they were in the past within local communities. I live about half a mile away from the exit for 495 off of Connecticut Avenue, and I know just in the 7 years I've lived in my home, there's no question that we've seen a significant increase in the amount of cars that are cutting through our neighborhood just to try and avoid Cedar and Connecticut. So, and it was interesting, there was an issue specifically on Norwood Drive that was brought to my attention, and really appreciated the rapid response of DOT in looking into that issue. But basically, the community felt that even at 25 miles per hour, because of how close it is to a local park, that threshold was too high and that it needed to be lowered to 15 miles per hour. And so your office did an assessment and found that it didn't hit the threshold because 85% of the drivers were going at least the 25 miles per hour. But it didn't make the neighborhood feel any better when hearing that response, because that meant that there were still approximately 15% that weren't going the 25, which they already felt was too high. And so, to Councilmember Friedson's point earlier, I do think that the manner in which we assess and evaluate, especially as it relates to Vision Zero, needs to be redone. And I'd be very interested in working with your office and obviously our committee on that specific issue, because there's still a lot of folks that left very frustrated with the assessment that was done by DOT, and that's a local issue, not even a state issue. So something that I'd like to work with your office on those specific thresholds. And last thing on that also is the two fastest growing demographics that we have in these neighborhoods are seniors and children, which are even more vulnerable to potential collisions and that sort of thing. So just a comment, don't know if you have a reaction or thought to that.
The speed hump policy is obviously a balancing act between wanting to be able to provide those solutions where neighborhoods want them and want them in a majority. They have lots of negative implications in terms of noise, and emergency response, et cetera. And it can be very divisive. So those thresholds have been set to try to constrain their application, frankly, to areas where there truly is consensus that they're needed and a technical basis that they're needed. Does that mean that's the absolute right balance point for that? And it doesn't. I mean, the regulation was implemented at a time when speed humps, I understand, were proliferating very quickly, and perhaps there's a new balance point that can be struck regarding that. But I'm glad we were responsive. It's too bad we didn't make the community more satisfied than we did, but we certainly can look at those issues with you and see if there's a different balance to be struck.
That'd be great. In previous conversations I've had with you regarding our partnership with the state, there have been instances, especially a couple years ago, in which the state was not entirely transparent or communicative with us as a local jurisdiction, in particular with regards to 270 and 495 and their plans. I guess my general question is, how will you work with Secretary Rahm, and what strategies will you use to ensure that that doesn't happen again and that there clearly is more concise collaboration between the state and us locally?
Yeah, the best thing that we can do as the Department of Transportation is to have open and honest dialogue with the state about what the community's concerns are, what the community is seeking from these projects, and be direct about it. But we don't set their policies, obviously. We can't control their communication. We prefer it when they share the same communication with us, and they usually do. And when they don't, we will make a point to let them know that we're not satisfied with the nature of that conversation. But I think we're in a good position in terms of having a collegial and professional relationship with the Secretary, with his administrators, and with the staff. But we will not be able to head off every unexpected announcement from them in projects that we may or may not support.
Gotcha. Okay, I appreciate that. And then just the final thing is just a comment. I've had the opportunity to work directly with you on a number of different issues over the year in my previous life. And I think one of the things that made Al so effective was he understood how to be effective within a bureaucracy, because it can be very challenging to be patient and do coalition building and deal with the complexities of budget, multiple agencies, and in your case, many different agencies trying to get the work forward. And he understood how to do that, and I think you do too, which I think will be a valuable asset to the county as a whole. And I hope that your vision for DOT is aligned exactly with the county executives, because I know where you are with a lot of this, and you serve at the pleasure. And so, you can only advise and guide. You can't ultimately institute policy, but I feel comfortable that at least that advice and guidance is sound and is well leveraged and well positioned. So look forward to the confirmation and appreciate your
Great,
nomination.
thank you. And just one comment on that. I had a conversation with the county executive and promised him to always give him my honest opinion and to give him all the facts I have regarding the decisions he's asked to make, and then to carry out the decisions he makes. So I'm hopeful that that relationship will continue along those lines.
Councilmember Katz.
Thank you very much, and I am going to be brief. The only thing, and everything has been said, and I appreciate everything that has been said, but the only thing that I've often wondered, and you're not going to have an answer for this today, but what happens if we didn't charge for ride-on bus at all? That every person that was on it, obviously we know what it costs us, but if every person on it would ride for free, what would that do to our traffic patterns? And obviously you're going to have to, if you're going to, when you do that, you'd also have to figure out what you're doing for the up-county and the underserved, and we should. I mean, if we charge for that, we should. But because right now, people, when they get in their car and ride on a road, they don't believe that they're paying anything additional to do that. They are. They're paying their insurance, they're paying for gasoline, they're paying for all those expenses, but it's like it's free. They didn't have to reach in their pocket that moment, unless they're buying gas, and pay for something. But whenever you get onto a ride-on bus, you're paying. So I just think that somehow, someday, someone should look into that and what it would do for our traffic patterns. And then the other thing is, Chris, and it's been said time and time again, I personally look forward to voting for you. I was teasing you before that you've had such a huge audience of people came out to be so concerned about us, the nomination and us voting on you. And for those at home who aren't looking, there's nobody in the audience, I think, that's not paid to be here right now. So we thank you, and we thank you for your service, and thank you for willing to do this.
Thank you.
All right, well, I don't see any other lights. I think that when we look at your resume, the work that you've done, the service that you provided to us here in the county, I have to say that this was a very good choice. And judging by all the questions, no doubt we will be in very close communication with you, trying to address all of these very important issues. But really do appreciate you stepping up, and we will be voting on October 29th. On this particular confirmation, and I guess reading the tea leaves, I think it's going to go well.
Thank you. Thank you.
And with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.